The story began with the moment when the protagonist got lost while running an errand. Now the girl was near the ajar room and accidentally heard a conversation. The men there were discussing the fact that Essen had disappeared, and that was just terrible. It was necessary by all means to find him. The heroine was horrified at what she had just heard. Suddenly, a vase fell out of her hands, which immediately shattered and attracted attention. The people in the room heard the sound of the falling vase perfectly. They inquired who was there. The heroine was immediately frightened because she thought that she was caught and death awaits her. At the same second, the door in front of her opened. Seeing the three men, she immediately smelled her imminent end. On their left, the prince's closest man and heir to the Marquisate of Oviedo stood at their side. The name of this young man was Turnia Aguirre Oviedo. On the right side stood the emperor's knight and brilliant swordsman. This man's name was Diano Shabi Benedetto. In their center stood the sole heir of Apennino, Adrian Breastkettle van Jakel Appenson. The heroine at this point thought she was just here on an errand from Her Highness the Princess. Adrian immediately inquired of her who she was. The girl, startled, stated that she belonged to Lupin Palace. But the man again stated that he didn't ask that. He asked who she was. The girl added that she was no one, and she was a common maid of honor. The man immediately exhaled and smiled. He then drew his sword and declared that he had enough of all these words and that she should just die. The next moment, he swung at the girl to kill her with his sword. The heroine was frightened because of this and screamed very hard. At the very last moment before he struck, the man was stopped by Turnia. He grabbed his arm and asked him to stop. If anyone died here, it would raise huge suspicions. Because of this whole thing, we need to be much more cautious. Adrian thought that all of this was really true, but he didn't like it at all. Immediately, he lowered his sword, and the girl was even more frightened. He then asked her how long she had been listening to all of this. The heroine tried to say something, but she was still afraid of him. The man mouthed that the one did not even think of deceiving him at the moment. The frightened girl further stated that she had been listening since the moment his fiancé ran away. The man pointed his sword at her again and wondered if that was it. Again, the heroine was frightened and stated that she had also heard that the bride was actually a cross-dressing man. All the people in the room were just petrified because of this. Next, they didn't know what to do with her. And the man said that this would not do at all, and it was necessary to kill her as soon as possible. Immediately, he swung his sword to end this girl once and for all. But suddenly, the heroine fell to her knees and, bowing before the man, asked him to spare her because she would do anything for him. These words of hers interested Adrian quite a lot. He wondered if she would do anything. Then the girl stood up and said that of course she would do anything. After her words, he began to gaze at the girl's face in front of him. Next, he took a deep breath and mouthed that it was fine then. After stating that it turns out, let it be her. She wondered in her head what he was talking about. The man continued that just the hair color is similar and the eye color is also the same. Well, with the appearance, something will be thought of. Also, with the voice can be something to do if you try hard enough. Or it is still possible, let her just then silent, and that's all. The girl was very curious, and she wondered what the man wanted from her. Adrian smiled because of this, and said that she would be his future bride. Just like that, the main character became the bride of the crown prince. After a while, the prince along with his friend were sitting over a cup of tea. The man was reviewing a report on the main character. Her name was Viola Bilbora, and she was a fallen aristocrat. Turney stated that there was nothing unusual about her, for it seemed she was indeed innocent. The prince at once threw down these papers and wondered why it was that he should marry. After all he wanted was to kill everyone. So he grabbed Essen and made him play the part of the bride, but really, he's not a bad face after all. But who would have thought he would run away saying he was a knight and had pride? Thought that once he inherits the throne, all of this would be over, because he would tolerate until then, and that's it. He then turned to his subordinate and inquired as to the progress of the search for Essenes. The latter stated that Diana was diligently searching for him. After that, the aristocrat asked why he was sitting here. After all, what about the training of the very wench was interesting? Turney remarked to the man to give him at least a little rest. After all, he only does every day who uses him. But the man did not want to listen to this, and immediately declared that he should go and train her. The subordinate wondered why it should be done now, After all, it is not necessary to rush like this. But again, the superior was not favorable and told him not to think so and to take care of it immediately. In consequence of this, Turney remarked that he had no rest indeed. The prince added that he should take charge and return with something that could be used. The lad immediately rose to do the will of his lord. In doing so, he stated that he would do everything, addressing the man and referring to His Highness as the Crown Prince. In the meantime, events were developing dramatically for the protagonist. In one morning, her world had completely changed. After all, even in the morning she was a simple and personal servant and became in the end the bride of the Crown Prince. The heroine sat in the manor all alone and thought about all these situations. Her mind was only spinning with thoughts of who she was, there, where she was. Suddenly, the silence of the room she was in was dispelled by a boy. He stated his hopes for the girl, calling her little sister. He further waved his hand at her and stated that he was now her big brother and his name was Turnia. The heroine wondered what to think of such a thing. This man suddenly became her older brother, and anything can really happen in life. Next, the guy asked if she knew that he was her older brother, but the girl, because of this, only smiled at him, and in her head she thought that he should apologize to her, but she does not want to know any of this at all. After all, now the girl was only disturbed by the thoughts of the whole situation that happened to her. After yesterday, she found herself locked in the Lilia Palace. Lily Palace is the very place where the bride of the Crown Prince lives and learns the routine of the imperial family. The heroine lay in her bed and thought she had been told she needed to rest so she could get down to business tomorrow. But all night long she did not sleep, for she wondered how she could sleep normally from all these circumstances. They also said that she was now a bride, so she must master the general knowledge. Burst into her room and dragged her here early in the morning. Now the girl was sitting with her so-called older brother and drinking tea. The heroine thought that it was hard to believe in all this, that this situation really happened in reality. Except for the girl, everyone was unfazed. The guy turned to the heroine and stated that she already knew, but he would explain again for clarity. For starters, he is Turney Aguida Oviedo, and the girl of today is Atienne Chevel Rabat Oviedo. So it turns out that everyone must think that she is the hidden daughter of the Marquis of Oviedo. From such strange words, the heroine was shocked and asked what he was saying. Next, the girl wondered what she had heard about this story after all. After all, it was said that the youngest daughter of the Marquis suddenly appeared. Still, it seemed to her that such an appearance was strange enough. And who would have thought that there would be circumstances like this? Then the guy went on to say that actually, if Essen hadn't arranged the escape, there would be no need to be so tense as well. But then he added that none of that was true, because if he hadn't escaped and the girl had found out about all of this, he would probably be dead. The girl understood that Essen was the Crown Prince's personal knight. It was most likely the name of the person who was the Crown Prince's fiancée. So it turns out that the bride is His Highness's favorite and a cross-dressing guy. The heroine was quite upset because of this situation, just thinking about why on earth they were talking about this very thing when she found herself there. After all, she didn't care if it was the Crown Prince's bride or groom, just so long as they left her alone and didn't touch her in the process. Turney continued his speeches about how she was certainly pitied as well. After all, how could one get caught in such a ridiculous moment like this? The heroine tearfully stated that the one would at least not talk about it. But the guy still went on to say that in any case, she still had a lot to learn. At the same time, he said that she should try to remember everyone properly if she still does not want to die, because she has only 2 weeks left before the ball. The girl got scared and asked if there were only 2 weeks left. The guy, with a smile on his face because of this, stated that everything is right, she heard. Whatever she has to do in that time frame, but she needs to look like Essen. She needs to perfectly fulfill the role of a bride like that man did earlier. After all, only if she does all these things will she not die then. The heroine was even more frightened by these words. Immediately, she remembered the prince and thought whether she could even survive in such a situation. Then also, the protagonist said that everything is fine and she will firmly remember it. At that, she called the so-called older brother by his grace, Mr. Oviedo. The guy smiled and stated that there was no need for such formalities. After all, They were now brother and sister, and she should address him as she pleased. After that, Us smiled and remarked that she would call him brother then. The lad declared that this was all excellent, and since she was a personal maid, she must know the faces of an aristocrat well. The girl remarked that in general terms, indeed, she knew them, but her brother remarked because of this, that if she still only knew in general terms, she would die. The girl immediately shouted with a smile that she knows and knows them all very well. While the protagonist and her teacher were sitting around discussing who the crown prince had walked in, he inquired if the training must be nearing completion. His subordinates immediately stated with a smile on his face that it was all true, and they were almost finishing now. The irony of this surprised her quite a bit, and she thought that those below had only just begun. Next, the heroine's future husband began to stare intently into the girl's face. Together, they crossed glances and looked at each other for a long time. The heroine wondered if she had done something wrong, and because of this, he was looking at her. After a while, His Majesty turned to his subordinate and said that he could already leave, pointing to the door. After all, this whole training thing wasn't that urgent at the moment. He then grabbed the guy and dragged him towards the exit. At the same time, Turney shouted that he had said recently that it was urgent. The man was unyielding and simply dragged the guy towards the exit. Just before he left, the man looked at his future wife once more. It was quite a cold look that went through the girl, and again she did not understand why he was looking at her like that. A few moments later, the door in front of the girl and immediately slammed shut. She stood there bewildered, wondering what it was all about and why he was looking at her so intently and strangely. There are two people in charge of the main character's education in this manner. The first of them is her so-called brother, Turney Oviedo. There is also another person, or to be more precise, a girl. This woman approached the protagonist and introduced herself, making up that her name is Lucy. She is the personal maid of Miss Etienne, and she should call her Madame Lucy. Further, the woman inquired, it turns out, it is her who is now on the Maid. After that, Lucy said that the girl should not worry about the ball, which will be held in just 2 weeks. If the girl trusted her, she would make her shine the brightest at the event. She further stated that the girl has a different physique, and it turns out that all the clothes will need to be hemmed. The heroine asked with surprise, really all of them, and the one because of this she said that it is really necessary. The girl immediately thought that this lady is not so simple as it might seem at first glance. The girl all this time thought about the fact that she was quite curious whether this woman also knows this very secret. It is unlikely that she does not know, but who knows if she does. After that, the heroine decided to act and ask directly. The heroine turned to the lady maid and asked if she knew that the bride of the crown prince was a man. Because of this, she remarked that, of course she knows, because we have herself and passed it then. Did everything so that no one would ever guess. Now the heroine realized that she also knows. After a while, she and her mentor entered the dressing room. The woman immediately began to measure the parameters of her new mistress. She was telling her that as soon as possible she needed to adjust the dress that the girl would wear to the ball, to be held in honor of Her Majesty the Empress's birthday in 2 weeks. And that dress is really beautiful. Worth the girl just wants to see this dress, and she also wants to wear it, so that she will see it even in her dreams. The heroine thought about what means the ball in which she has to participate, a party to celebrate the birth of Her Majesty the Empress. After a while, Mistress Maid was writing down the parameters in her notebook, also talking about how Mr. Essen liked it too, and how unfortunate it was that he had disappeared so suddenly like that. She wondered what the atmosphere between them was so tense. The heroine asked what she meant by it being between them. The woman stated that of course she was referring to Mr. Essen and His Majesty Crown Prince Adrian. Such was their special relationship back then. It turns out that they had been friends since they were children. The heroine wondered if it was really just friendship back then. The maid continued to say that His Highness had said that there was no way he would never appear at a ball with a man who was inferior to Essen in any way. Next, the maid told the protagonist not to worry. After all, we'll soon have an adjustment too, and she'll never be caught. Further, she added that finally all the measures are finally taken. Because of this, Lucy got excited and shouted that she had to find a suitable pull for the new Miss ATI. The heroine immediately thought, if that's the case, how is her training after all? Adrian Brest Keitel van Jekel Appensen is the crown prince of the Apennino Empire. He was widely praised for being the sole heir, making him the perfect emperor for the future. There was nothing to say about his acumen, for he is talented in all fields. Furthermore, he was born of an empress, making him the ideal heir according to tradition. Also, if rumors were to be believed, the crown prince's appearance was truly perfect. But still, there was one serious flaw that people didn't realize, and it lies in the extremely bad character of this man. Because of this, the protagonist thought, how after all, rumors about it so did not spread. Even if trying to hide such a terrible character, it was simply impossible, and this is surprising. To all this, Crown Prince very much dislikes girls. That's why they say, despite the pressure, he continued to avoid marriage. But then there was a partner, drawn to him by fate. And this chosen one was Atiet Chevel Rabat Oviedo. She was the unexpectedly entered the light of the daughter of the Marquis of Oviedo, where for 5 generations only sons were born. The protagonist didn't know what tricks they used, but people had no questions about her origins. In any case, it turns out that that daughter was a cross-dressing guy. Such a heroine could not imagine even in a dream. But I wonder why he ran away. Perhaps he simply could not stand this obnoxious character either. Next, the girl, smiling, really thought that this makes sense. Now she understands exactly why the bride ran away after all. Suddenly, the main character turned her future husband. The girl just came to her senses and wondered what he wanted. Then he asked what it is that she is thinking about all this time. The heroine thought that she was thinking too deeply and did not hear what the man was saying. Immediately after that, she started mumbling something, realizing she had to answer, but she couldn't hear anything. Adrian started pulling out his sword and informed her if she wanted to die alone here. The heroine tried to justify that she was just thinking about her womanhood, but the crown prince was not condescending and said that if she was thinking about her own, it seems that she really wants to say goodbye to this world. The heroine immediately fell to her knees and begged him to spare her, for naturally she was wrong. Turnia smiled at this time and declared to Adrian to stop joking around like this about her. The girl immediately looked up and wondered if he was just really joking. But the man in front of her was really holding onto his sword, and she thought he was belly up. Here he would pull out his sword, and how could he be joking? The prince immediately turned to the girl and asked that she repeat what he had said before. The heroine hesitated and wondered how she would know all this. Then she looked at the people sitting next to the man and with a look asked them for help. But Diano immediately turned away from the girl, pretending not to notice her. She then looked at her his so-called older brother and thought about him helping one more time. After all, does he really want him to send his sister to the other side of the world just like that? With a pleading look for help, she continued to look at the man across from her. The guy understood the girl's plea for help and pointed to his mouth. He, moving his lips, tried to pronounce the word that the girl had to say. Because of what she saw, the protagonist was able to read the word date. The crown prince turned to his future chosen one again and asked if she would answer him. The heroine confusedly began to say the word that he probably wanted a date with her, but the man immediately mouthed that this nonsense she now here is carrying. Because of this, the heroine was even more frightened and thought that now she was definitely the end. Immediately after that, she looked at the smiling guy who told her about it. She wondered if this guy was setting her up by saying such things. The prince continued his speech about how even though he gave her several chances, she couldn't justify it. The heroine at this point begged for mercy and said that she was wrong. At this thought, and when was it that he was the one who gave her a chance after all? Next, the man stated that it seemed that this girl was stupid and wondered if she would be of any use. After all, she would probably get caught right away. Turney, because of this, stated that it was better this way after all than nothing they had at all. The heroine thought that it is true that it is not the dog that bites that barks, but the one that is silent and wags its tail. She was talking about her older brother. After a while, Diano joined the conversation. He said that to all appearances, she was not lacking in wit. The prince inquired whether he was now opposing him, and the lad declared that of course not, for how could he dare to oppose his orders? But the crown prince again repeated that he had opposed him, to which his interlocutor remarked that he had not done so. But the heroine thought that he pretended to help, but turned out unfortunately completely useless. In addition, it seems that the prince, on the contrary, even more angry about it. Further, the girl thought that everywhere she had enemies and they could not kill her, and now they are definitely looking forward to make a mistake. Afterward, the girl prayed to God that she didn't want to die. Turney turned to His Highness and inquired then whether he would marry that girl or not. This caused the elder to interrogate if the one also wanted to die. The guy, hearing this, immediately apologized to him. And the heroine, in turn, because of what she heard, she wondered who the girl was. Then the man continued to discuss something among themselves, and the girl plunged into her own thoughts. At the same time, she realized that most likely she would not be told about it. Next, I will bring word that the princess is looking for this maid. After all, it turns out, she went on an errand, but never returned. The man immediately spoke of what he had recently told her to say, that she had simply died. But now he did not say that who would believe such nonsense, for she did not seem convinced. The older man stated that this one had been dealt with in some way. The boy became frustrated and remarked that once again he had been given a very difficult assignment to finish. Just then, Diano turned to His Highness. He noticed that he thought that if he was going to kill her, it would be better to deal with her quickly and remove the body. Such a turn of events the heroine could not have expected. She wondered if this mouth should be sewn up after all. After all, how dare he dispose of someone else's life like that? The crown prince said he was talking such nonsense and asked if he would marry that crazy girl. The guy turned pale from this and told His Highness to at least know the measure and expressions. After all, how can he not be ashamed to say such terrible things? He further declared that he would rather die than marry that maiden. But Adrian said that he did not have to die. At that moment, the main character thought she was jealous. After all, she wants to live, but here everyone is discussing the prospect of her further murder. Then the girl got a little courage and tried to get into their conversation. She asked if he needed a bride. All this time, the crown prince had successfully withstood the pressure even without a bride. On the contrary, people were more surprised at the existence of a bride he had unexpectedly brought to his place. Now, the heroine sat and thought that it was not necessary to go this far and look for a replacement after all. After a while, the prince said that naturally, he needed it all. The girl was surprised because of this and asked why this was so. The man told her that she needed to know all this, and the girl added that she did not. He further stated for her to just focus on her case, and the frightened heroine agreed, and so she will do so stated. Turney entered the conversation and wondered why a man would do this to her. After all, it is still possible for her to be quite so interesting. He went on to say that Her Majesty wanted His Highness to marry as soon as possible. All this time he has managed to avoid marriage by hiding behind his youth. And now, having passed his second 10, His Highness is slowly approaching the age of marriage, and the old issue is not going away. The heroine noticed that it turns out, here it is something. Next, the guy will continue the conversation that to everything else Her Majesty wants the prince to marry a certain girl. And because of this, girl is very unusual. Because of these words, the prince said that it is better to already destroy their empire than to make that crazy girl a crown princess. The heroine drank her tea and thought that he must really hate her. His Majesty asked his subordinates if they had found Essen, but one of them stated that they hadn't found him yet. Further, Turney, with a smile on his face, stated that it was probably all because the man was too rough in bed. This is the kind of information of the main character Aj Chayesh Sheikh flew out of her hands. After all, such details she did not want to hear at this time. The girl immediately shouted words about the bed. Then she blushed very much from the shame she felt. After that, she realized that she had drawn attention to herself by these actions after all. As a consequence, she declared that she was just air, and to continue the conversation. The prince was surprised and asked since when the heir has to talk. The girl declared with a smile that indeed it was all wonder. The prince then sadly stated that the prince's personal guard had escaped after all, and since he had made that decision himself, it would probably be difficult to find him. Diana wondered if perhaps he had simply gone to his home, but Adrian said that was unlikely. He had already contacted his family and was informed that he never came. He sighed sadly and added that he would have to look for him soon. Turney quipped with a smile that they had a replacement after all. After all, now he wondered if it was necessary to search for him so quickly. The prince looked at the girl and wondered if he believed in her. The protagonist at this time simply smiled back at him. The man then continued with his story about how, whatever it was, it had to be done to make it work for her. To the girl, he stated that she only had 2 weeks. One must by all means safely survive the birthday celebrations of Her Majesty the Empress. Because of all this, the heroine wondered what would happen if it was suddenly guessed that she was a fake, to which Adrian stated that she would otherwise die or simply die. From all this, it turns out that she should try hard to prevent this from happening. The heroine listened carefully to the words of her future husband and agreed that she would try. At the same time, the sight of her was quite frightened because of the scary words that I said the man. After that, the girl together with her first mentor immediately left that room. Next, they made their way to the place where the heroine had been training all this time. Turney looked at the non with a smile. Further stated that then they would chat like friendly brother-sister friends. The heroine, because of this, only smiled back. At that, she thought, where does he see these brother and sister? After all, as it is, they are strangers who do not have a drop of common blood. It would be necessary for the girl to get away from here as soon as possible. The guy standing in front of her immediately turned around and inquired about something from ATI. He wondered if she was thinking of running away from them. The heroine said with a smile that what kind of escape he was talking about. At the same time, she wondered if he was reading her mind. She further wondered what would happen if she was suddenly caught while escaping. She wondered what would happen to her then. The interlocutor remarked in surprise, how could it be that, because, of course, her head would immediately fly from her shoulders. That's because the girl herself should understand and know that the inner palace where the imperial family lives has the strictest security, especially the Lily and Poinsettia palaces. After all, it turns out that because of Essen's escape, the guards have been increased several times. The heroine stated that then she understands everything. Further asked the interlocutor about Adrian at all, or is he devoid of mercy? The guy stated that even the fact that she is alive now, it is not his moral him mercy. The protagonist immediately looked at him in surprise because of these words. While doing so, she thought, what other mercy is it according to him? Then the mentor said that she would not pay attention to all this. At that, he added that her brother would survive even if he teased Adrian. But the girl can't afford that anyway. That said, he stated that he has high hopes that she will at least live longer. At the same time, he called her his dear little sister. Since that very day, the protagonist had completely gotten rid of any thoughts of escape. It didn't matter to her whether Turney had specifically mentioned the execution, but she was sure that his words were not a lie then. In all the days that followed, the girl began to focus intently on her studies. All this she did in order to stay alive after all. At this time, the protagonist is learning the state of things in the imperial palace. She also learns etiquette, which should be observed by all aristocrats without exception. At least she can keep up with the program thanks to the fact that she comes from the fallen aristocracy. Otherwise, she probably would have died at the hands of the crown prince by now. All the classes that the heroine was going through were quite harsh, but still, she was glad that she had passed them. After all, the more she studied, the more likely it was that she would stay alive after all. Madame Lucy constantly came and asked the girl for dresses. The heroine was a little bored with all this, and she thought for what dresses she carries. After all, she needs to learn. So she constantly listened to the incessant laughter of Madame Lucy. Constantly, Madame would come and ask if that dress was pretty this or pretty that. That is, previously she had always noticed that they were beautiful, but still she wondered when they would start training. At that, the girl thought that she did not care whether her dress was beautiful or not. It had nothing to do with her future life. Now she just had to study. The woman remarked to her on such questions that everything was fine. After all, she feels that the girl will cope with everything perfectly. The heroine, such moments, thought, everything she can cope with, if she still does not know anything. One day, someone knocked on their room. Both of them immediately turned their attention to the front door, and the woman stated to the person to come in. This person of interest was Diano. He had come that day to inquire if all was going well in the main character's training. The woman, as always, laughed and said that everything is just perfect in their training. But the heroine did not like such answers, and she wondered what could be perfect here. The guy then said that if that was true, then everything was going perfectly, and further left their room. At that very moment, the heroine thought that this is literally a negligent attitude to duty. After all, before leaving, shouldn't he have carefully checked whether the preparation for this very event was going well? It had already been a few days since Atienne had started training, so that she could be the perfect replacement for the Crown Princess. Crown Prince Adrien sat in his office and pondered over all of this. He thought that he didn't have much hope for anything, but yet this case was going unexpectedly smoothly. He thought about the fact that although this girl looks lost and arm-absorbent cotton, Atienne is quite savvy. She also captures the atmosphere well and has some good abilities. Another of the good things was that also she knows how to adjust to any situation. And perhaps because her life is on the line, according to reports, she quickly absorbs information in all lessons. Next, the man continued to sit in his musings, thinking about the fact that naturally she is trying her best not to die in the process. However, is there any logical judgment then? It seems to use her more and more. The Crown Prince was reasoning about all these things with his subordinates. Turney, upon hearing this, stated that perhaps it was because she was originally an aristocrat. After all, he does say that their ATI is indeed a capable girl. Men such words are a bit surprising, and he thought that they are not really siblings after all. At the same time, he realizes that he has no need to express his concern for her by saying that it is their Athi. He further inquired on what she was capable of, and if she was capable of becoming a crown princess. The boy remarked that she probably wasn't after all. The man was surprised at this answer, and asked then what she was capable of. The man, in turn, stated that she was simply capable of being his sister. Because of such a mocking attitude, the prince became very angry, while thinking perhaps he should finish him off now. Then he thought about it for a while, and thought that he shouldn't do it after all. After all, it wasn't time yet, and if he killed him, he wouldn't be the one with too many unnecessary things to do. Turney, with a smile on his face, continued his stories, stating that he was so glad that he finally had such a cute little sister after all. And what was even more wonderful was that she listened to him all the time. Another guy sitting in the room wanted to remark that it was because he was threatening her, but the guy covered his mouth. Next, he turned to Adrien again. He told him that dance lessons were finally starting today and asked if he would keep her company. The man wondered why he would do that and called him an idiot. The guy, in turn, said that he probably wouldn't go after all. Then he added that there was nothing he could do about it, because this big-hearted older brother could do it himself. He pretended to cry and added that his sister was quite poor. Adrien listened to all this nonsense and thought that he was sure that in the beginning, Viola had annoyed this guy too. Now, however, he was very much wondering why his attitude towards her had suddenly changed so drastically. In another part of the estate, the madam was telling the protagonist that she had ordered 50 sets of clothes to begin with. At the same time, the girl wondered if there were 50 sets. She was quite so, wondering if she would be able to wear all these dresses at least once in her life. The woman said that since it was her first time ordering was quite modest. Immediately afterwards, she laughed again. At the same time, stated that next time they would buy 200 outfits, and added that it would just be fun picking out all of them. Such statements pretty much shocked the main character. At that, she thought she wanted to play dolls using a girl. After that, the woman added that tomorrow they will also choose accessories to all this together. With these words, she got the main character to the end. The girl at this time was very angry. After all, this is quite contagious laughter. Her mentor will soon develop neuroses in the girl. A friend in the room they were in, someone knocked, and the woman immediately announced that the person to enter them. This person turned out to be the woman's assistant, who whispered something in her ear. Next, the reeling woman laughed with her infectious laughter and asked the girl to sit down for a while. She then left the room with the very same girl. In a room with many dresses, the protagonist was now alone. The girl sat and found out about how much she would not look, but really, it's all pretty amazing spreads. Immediately afterward, the heroine went to consider the room in which she had been all this time. In doing so, she took a dress of her own and examined them closely. thought about the fact that it was burdensome for her to buy even one cheap dress. After a while, the heroine conceived that it would not be here if she stole even one. But at the same time, she immediately remembered the prince with his rough look, and realized that then her life would end, and it was better to leave this venture. A long time passed, and the protagonist thought why she was gone for so long. Then she immediately went to the door where her other mentor had entered. As she approached that very door, the protagonist heard someone talking there. One of the women was stating that she heard Lady Gabrielle had gone to see Her Majesty the Empress. Her interlocutor wondered if he had done so right away. It seemed to people that she came too often. It must have been because she wants to marry His Highness the Crown Prince. Next, the protagonist peeked through the gap between the doors, saw who was still whispering amongst themselves. The two servants who served in this estate were talking. Because of the words heard, the heroine thought. After all, it turns out that Gabrielle is a lady from the Chancellor's family. Now she wondered if she was the crazy girl that the Crown Prince was talking about. Then one of the maids asked her why the Crown Prince hated Lady Gabrielle so much. She was very beautiful. Another girl asked if she didn't know about the rumors. These words should not interest her, and she immediately thought about what rumors we are talking about. The servant stated that people say the Crown Princes, the kind likes men. That is why neither Lady Gabrielle nor other girls he does not like. Her interlocutor inquired what is so. Hubernia's claim that he likes men is somehow strange. There is, after all, Miss Atienne. Just then, the girl whispered that in fact there are also rumors that Miss Atienne is just a cover. From this whole situation, the protagonist was absolutely shocked. At the same time, she thought from the last words, whether she had been exposed after all? The girls further continued to gossip. One of them said that this is just some nonsense, and the one who made it up should write novels. After all, is there really such ridiculous gossip going around the palace? After a rather large amount of time, after all, the second mentor to the heroine returned with books. Immediately, she put a stack in front of the girl and said that all this should be learned from beginning to end. At that, she laughed again with her infectious laugh that infuriated the heroine. She then added for the girl to keep this book that she would be studying from today. Ati opened it and was horrified. After all, she thought, there isn't a single picture, and the letters are this small. Even if she read it all day, she would never get through it. After Lucy added that after 7 o'clock they would move on to dance practice. The girl at this point decided that her death was simply inevitable. But still, the heroine did not want to give up in any way and continued her studies. For herself, she firmly decided that she will definitely survive. While the girl was engaged in her studies, her second mentor went with a report to the Crown Prince. Adrian asked the woman how his maid was doing, but the woman remarked to His Majesty that he should not call her that, but should call her his fiancée. The man declared that it was all right then, and inquired how his bride was doing after all. The woman with a smile on her face immediately remarked that she was doing just fine with everything. Next, she wondered where the man had found such a lovely girl. The man, in turn, thought of her and wondered what other lovely girl was out there. But Lucy went on to say that she was very kind and followed all instructions perfectly. The girl may not be as pretty as Sir Essen, but still she has a zest about her. It is a zest that makes her utterly charming. After all, it turns out that she works hard from morning to night to master a wide variety of fields, such as etiquette, poetry, singing, dancing, music, history, and philosophy. She has never once been cranky or dropped out of her studies. She studies diligently, even though it is not easy for her. His Highness turned to Diano. The man in turn approached and asked His Majesty what he wanted. The man asked what he thought of Etienne. The lad was immediately in favor of the thought. Then remarked that judging by how well she gets along with people in the palace, he thought this girl wasn't bad at all. But how about observing her for a while longer? Adrian immediately thought about it because of that. Thought about whether there is that talk about watching still. Then can he put everything so calmly? After all, the ball was coming up soon, and he wondered if it would go smoothly. And if something went wrong, he would have to marry that crazy woman. And that was exactly what frightened the man. After some time of reflection, he asked if there was any news about Essen, but his subordinate said that there was nothing at the moment. The prince thought that here was Essen, what a place he had been driven to after all. Then he remembered one of their conversations. At that time, his crossdresser had asked him how much longer he would have to do all this, and Adrian had told him then, how much longer? After all, it should have been obvious enough until he became emperor. The guy, because of this, asked if he could stop if he killed him, to which the principal inquired if it was treason against the crown. But the guy immediately shouted that it was not for such a thing that he became a knight after all. The man stated to him that he knew all that, but he is still his knight even though he is in this form. Essen inquired if he had ever seen a knight in a dress, to which he stated that it turns out he would be the first, and he should take that as an honor. The interlocutor remarked whether he was asking to die by his sword on purpose, but Adrian said that he would just kill him first. This pissed the guy off, and he shouted that he had had enough and tore off his veil. It was after this conversation that he disappeared. The prince thought, who knew then that he would really run away. At this, he stated that he probably should have killed him then without a second thought. Immediately afterward, he thought that it all turned out to be because of the empress and that very girl. It's widely known that Adrian hates women, but it's actually not true. He hates absolutely all people, regardless of gender or age. He wouldn't even talk to anyone but his closest friends from childhood if it were up to him. One might think that he is shy, but that would be disproved by those who know the prince well. The empress has always been displeased with Hadrian and his treatment of the ladies. In fact, one of the reasons for this hatred of mankind is due to the fact that he was imposed on the girl from childhood. One day, the empress issued an unexpected order, completely disregarding the opinion of her son. She declared that if he did not bring a bride within a week, he would marry that very girl. The reasons for Adrian's reluctance and dislike of this girl are many, but still there is one most striking. At her age of 7, that girl took offense that instead of playing with her, Adrian was riding. She took the horse away without saying where. As a result, without food or water, the animal soon died. That girl forgot she'd hidden the mare, and when Adrian called her to account, she said something disgusting. Then she asked if the one had just died. This was the key event after which Adrian began to hate people, including this girl. Next, he hurriedly arranged a whole week of ball just to avoid marrying that girl. But all his efforts were in vain. The appointed week passed with no results. The last remaining way to avoid marrying that girl was to disguise Essen and arrange an effective engagement. Of course, Essen's consent was never asked at that time. Now, the crown prince was declaring to his subordinate to be sure to catch Essen and bring him to him. To which the lad remarked that he understood everything and would do so. At the same moment, His Majesty was approached and stated that Albert from Grace's palace had arrived. The man immediately thought that Grace was the Empress's palace. He further told his butler to announce that he was not present at the moment, to which the man did not notice that he knew he was here. It is also an order from Her Majesty the Empress. Lady Gabriel has arrived, and the Empress wants the prince to attend the tea party. The protagonist was in her room at this time. Suddenly, someone came to her and greeted her, calling her little sister. It was Turney, who wondered if she was studying a lot. The heroine remarked to him that she had studied somehow, to which the guy with a smile again stated for her to do it all harder if she didn't want to die somehow. The girl wondered what he was talking about, since what kind of death was that? He kept talking about how His Highness couldn't make it, and that was a very big pity, so he was in favor of it. The heroine remarked that she wasn't really sorry. At that, she thought that here was one that wasn't both gone from her life, and it would have been much better. The heroine at this time I moved a little away from the guy, and he wondered why she was running away. Further asked if she was going to approach him and if she was disgusted with him like that. The man then made it look like he was crying. At the same time, he claimed that his only sister ATI was pretty mean. The heroine thought that she should not fall for it and better just ignore it. Suddenly, this short conversation was interrupted by Lucy's mentor. She clapped her hands and said with a smile that it was time for him to start already. At that moment, the main character had a dance lesson and her partner was Turney. At the same time, they took each other's hands, and the guy asked, "After all, she says that he is disgusting, but she still holds his hand." To which the protagonist did not state anything to him. Next, they just started spinning in a dance, practicing the movements. The partner stated to the girl that they did pretty well. The heroine thought that finally her survival rate had increased. After the dance, a woman came up and stated with a smile that they were doing better than she had hoped. Next, I turned to the girl and inquired if she had ever learned to dance. To something, she said that she had a little bit, but she had done something before the misfortune befell their family. This made her interlocutor very upset, and the girl thought that then she basically did not care, but now the situation is much more catastrophic. The guy approached his little sister and stated to her, taking her by the hand, that everything will be fine with her. He further added that their family is definitely nothing threatening, because one is no longer one. The heroine thought that she would rather be alone. Next, the partner stated that they would probably call it a day with the dance. The heroine looked at him in surprise at this point, and he continued that it was time for him to go report to the main man. The protagonist thought that these two were pretty strange guys. After all, they had only had one waltz and had already ended there. Obviously, they must be annoyed by the whole thing too. After a moment, the heroine was alone in the room and the door slammed shut behind them. But suddenly, Turney came back and smilingly wondered why she was frozen, since she was also going with him. The heroine wondered what he was carrying. The guy at that moment grabbed her hand and dragged her behind him. Further, they walked together, and the one asked why he was still nasty. After all, he even washed his hands well. The girl thought that she just wanted the ones to leave her alone. The crown prince at the same time came to the place he was called to. But there he noticed something that made him very angry, and he thought he had been tricked. There was the very girl there whom the man was supposed to marry. When she saw him, she immediately smiled and greeted His Highness, saying that she missed him very much. But Adrian immediately turned around to leave from there. In doing so, he thought that the Empress's order had forced him to come there, but there was no need to be here without her. The girl saw this and asked where His Highness was going. She also asked if he was embarrassed by the glance she threw him, and because of that, he immediately ran away. The prince stopped and looked at her because of this with his cold gaze. She, for her part, continued to state that it was all completely in vain. After all, Gabriel is experiencing His Highness, the same thing. Now it turns out that they no longer need to reveal all their feelings. The man thought that lately the Empress was constantly trying to push them together. It turns out that for the next few months, he won't be able to move if his mother calls. The female interlocutor went on to say that if he left like this, then Her Majesty the Empress would be very upset. She also turned to His Highness and stated that the Empress had told him to tell him something. The Crown Prince wondering what it was that she wanted to convey after all. The girl continued, "Say that if he is not here when Her Majesty returns, she will accept an even grander gift for him." At this point, he realized that he was now at a complete disadvantage. Further still, he sat down at the table and took a cup of tea in his hands. Gabriel wondered how long it had been since they had seen His Highness, claiming he must have missed him so much that he couldn't sleep a wink at night, and neither could she. To which the man stated that he did not do that at all. She further claimed that His Highness had just said that he missed her a lot too, or she had heard that, but added that she understood it all without words. He remarked to her that it was not at all as she said. The interlocutor went on to say that they say exaggerated negation is complete agreement. This implies that he missed her so much. While they were discussing all this, they heard someone approaching them. Immediately afterward, they turned their attention to those very people. There, they noticed that the protagonist was standing there along with Crown Prince Diano and Turney's subordinates. All of them immediately exchanged glances with each other. Adrian looked at all of them and wondered what kind of situation had just occurred. In order to understand the situation that had happened, it was necessary to go back to the past for a while. Then the protagonist, together with her mentor, came to Adrian. Now did not want to inform the prince that Atienne is a very good dancer. They noticed only Diano in the new office. The boy wondered where their ringleader had gone. His interlocutor immediately noticed that she was here. The boy asked him who he was talking about. He said that the girl had come to them. Turney was shocked and stated if it was the same girl who showed up. Diana said that Her Majesty the Empress was going to have a tea party with her and invited His Highness too. The mentor immediately looked at the protagonist with a smile. Because of that, she didn't understand what he wanted and why he was looking like that. But after a moment, he announced that finally, her exit was finally coming. The girl inquired what it was, he says. Next, the three of them went to Madame Lucy's house. She was shocked that they had shown up so quickly and wondered if they were done with the warehouse. but she was immediately told that none of that mattered now, because the girl had shown up. Finally, it was time for their ATI to step forward. After that, she smiled evilly at her interlocutor. At the same time, she said that everything is clear to her now, and since Lady Gabrielle is here then, of course, Mrs. Atienne must also be present. The heroine asked who this Gabrielle was. The woman remarked, "Doesn't she know her? After all, she is the only daughter of the Chancellor." Well, the heroine noticed that she knew, but it was not so clear. Now she understood that the girl they were talking about was Gabrielle. Lucy said that Lady Gabrielle is a young girl from the house of Valeriro. They are related to the Empress Dowager on her mother's side and the infamous House Nebel. Because of this, she gains the Empress Dowager's favor. And as a person, she is still so-so. The girl thought that Madame Lucy doesn't seem to like Gabrielle much. Further thought about the fact that she did, after all, know that she was from a very, very wealthy family. The obsession of the non-Nebels with money is so well known that even commoners have a taste for it. The girl knew, moreover, that much of their family's valuables had passed to the Nebel family during the decline. So it just so happens that Gabrielle is the only daughter of that family. Lucy went on to say that this girl's reputation is not good, but she is still popular in high society. The heroine stated that she understood everything now. Turney smilingly remarked that it's okay calling her little sister, since their family is much more successful. The mentor, on the other hand, stated to the girl that she should mentally prepare herself. The heroine asked what she should prepare for. She said that, of course, to appear in front of His Highness the Crown Prince. Why, I was frightened and wondered what it was all for. Well, the woman added that she was his fiancée after all. So, naturally, she must wrestle His Highness away from Lady Gabrielle. Turney also added that this was all true. The heroine thought, why should she do all this, since she simply doesn't need him, and let her take him away? Next, the mentor shouted for her to get up quickly and think of it as a rehearsal for the ball. After a short preparation, the heroine was already on her way to the prince along with her mentors. On the way, her older brother stopped and told his sister that everything would be fine, since they were close by. The girl thought it sounded so unmotivating. Diano stopped too and asked that he would not wait. Next, he pulled out a veil and held it out to the girl. While doing so, he stated that the woulda took it, since Essen always wore it. The heroine immediately took it and put it on her head. At last, all the preparations were made, and they could go to their place in peace. After a while, they arrived at their planned place, and the protagonist immediately looked them over. The crown prince was sitting across from the smiling girl and already had his ball in preparation. Turney, noticing this, shouted that they should hurry up and go or the ball would definitely leave its sheath. The heroine exchanged glances with the same girl. As she did so, she thought, there she is. What a turnout. She also noticed that the girl had darkened very sharply, obviously because the girl had interrupted their idyll. Further, she thought that only the one would know that the girl had come with these two literally on pain of death. After a while, Atienne joined their tea party. The two so-called helpers left the girl. Diano stated that his sword was left alone on the formation and must be crying alone without it. And Turney stated that he had an urgent business to attend to, and the protagonist wondered if he had forgotten to turn off the light in the room. At the same time, she thought, they are traitors, because they promised to support her. Because of all this, it turned out that now they were sitting only the three of them. The heroine was very uncomfortable, and she thought how tense it was to be there. The prince stated that it had been a while since he had seen her, addressing Lady Atienne. He also added that it turns out his fiancée is very busy. Gabrielle wondered if such a busy mean. The heroine thought that she could hear everything at that moment. Then the girl went on to say that Her Majesty the Empress had invited her to dine with her. Now she wondered if His Highness would join her, to which the man declared that naturally he would not. Her interlocutor remarked that if he was so loaded after all, she hoped that next time together he would not enjoy dinner. At the same time, he thought that he did not say that he was loaded. Here's some tea for them. She immediately put a cup on the table. She shouted to the maid that the tea had gone cold and that she should bring a new one, to which she agreed that she would bring it right away. Gabrielle said that this tea could only be bought through the Nebel family. She had it specially prepared for His Highness. The man simply said nothing to this one and ignored it as usual. Next, the girl was changed the tea and she took it again and sipped a little. Again, she put the cup on the table very abruptly. At the same time, she asked who had made the tea and said that the person immediately came up to her. The protagonist immediately thought about what had happened all of a sudden. Looking at the cup, she thought that she could not see anything and there was no problem, so there was also a pleasant aroma. The servant, because of this, immediately came up. The girl inquired whether it was she who brewed it, to which the latter remarked that it was so. Gabrielle immediately chimed in that it was the other tea leaves. She wondered if she couldn't make everything normal. Next, this same girl took her cup and poured the hot tea on the servant. Because of what she saw, the protagonist was simply shocked. At the same time, she thought about what she was doing. The heroine tried to say something to the girl, but after a few words, she immediately stopped talking. At the same time, the maid was already on her knees and begged to be forgiven and complained over her. Gabrielle, at this time, I shouted at her to do the right thing if you don't want her father and her whole family kicked out. The girl further continued to beg to be spared and forgiven, turning to her mistress. The lady, in turn, picked up the cup and swung it at the girl. At the same time, shouted that because of her, she was about to do something. But at the same moment, the protagonist could not stand it and ran up to the girl, stopping her. The latter, in turn, asked her what she was about now. Atienne noticed that it seemed to her that she was overdoing it at the moment. Of course, the maid had made a mistake, but she could not have been more lenient with her. She asked if she meant to say that she was not lenient. After all, it turns out that the girl is her personal servant. It turns out that no matter how she punishes her, it is her personal business. She asked if it was not so or if she didn't understand something. The heroine listened attentively and looked at the maid's hands, which were wounded. Then she turned to her interlocutor and said that first of all, she was also a human being. Such words of the girl impressed Gabrielle very much because she did not expect to hear such a thing. The crown prince, in turn, sat and listened to what his two girls were talking about. Then the same girl asked the heroine what she had just said. The girl remarked that she had said that the maid was also an ordinary person. So it turns out that it is necessary to punish for mistakes, but the nobility of the master also requires to show great generosity. The interlocutor inquired of Lady Atienne whether Da had laid eyes on her maid. She also added that she didn't understand why the lady was sticking up for the girl. The protagonist noted that if Lady Gabrielle scolded the maid secretly, she would not have interfered. But he seems to forget. But His Majesty the Crown Prince is present. And so, pointing at him with her hand, she asked him if she thought she was behaving rather rudely in front of His Highness. The man at this time sat and listened intently to their conversation. At the same time, he thought that it was all quite clever on the girl's part. It turns out that she is quite skillful with words, so she is also able to get angry at this time. Gabrielle had been different from everyone else since childhood. She beat her maids with a ring and made those she disliked wear strange rags. Adrien didn't like Gabrielle allowing herself to insult others, but he never got involved. It was all because he was just used to it all. Still, there was no way he could understand why on earth she was unleashing such right in front of him. Next, the man set down his drink and declared that that was enough. So he asked if they didn't realize that the outcome was already obvious. The girls heard themselves addressed and immediately turned towards His Highness. Adrien stated that he thought the girl was tired today. Because of that, he thought it would be better for her to just go home. She, in turn, wondered what he was talking about right now. The man continued that he would inform the empress himself. Suddenly, the butler came up and addressed Lady Nabel. He said that he would escort her to the exit of the imperial palace. There was nothing left for the girl to do but to obey the prince's will. Then the butler still took the girl away, leaving the protagonist alone with the crown prince. Because that very girl had left, the protagonist exhaled with ease. Next, they exchanged glances along with Adrien. With a rather sweet look, the girl looked at the man. At that, she immediately apologized to him and said that she had been too presumptuous. But the man, in turn, added that it was not true, and everything was fine now. Immediately, the frightened girl looked up, and moments later saw that the man even smiled a little. While doing so, he stated that the beta continued in the same manner. This caused the girl to interject that he was saying such a thing. And here he added that he was saying for the one to keep it up. He then leaned very close to the girl and remarked that he was the only one whose attitude she should not care about. After this moment, a certain amount of time passed. The butler knocked in His Highness's study and addressed him. He stated to the Crown Prince that Her Highness was calling for him, but the man, in turn, did not want to go to her and stated to tell him that he was away on a hunting trip. The butler added that the Empress knows that he is not now on the hunt, nor is he engaged in affairs of state, nor is he lost in possession of a ball, and so she immediately told him to report to her now. The man was shocked by this. All these words were the top 3 most frequent excuses that Hadrian had used so far. After that day, the Empress had summoned him to her countless times, but he had always refused. At this very time, Diana was in the man's room. The Crown Prince in turn looked at him, inviting him to take action. Next, the man realized what needed to be done at this time. Immediately, he turned to the butler and stated that this was all very rude. These highnesses are about to go to training right now, and they were just having a discussion about new tactics, and now they are going to go to the formation. He also added that he apologized to the Empress Dowager, but His Highness must fulfill his duties. The man he was addressing immediately exhaled deeply. After all, he was fed up enough with all of this, and he stated that he would hand everything over to her that way. Because of all this, Hadrian turned to his subordinate and stated that he was doing a good job. The guy immediately smiled and asked if that meant that he was going to train with him, to which the guy coldly stated that naturally, no. The guy was upset by this, and he wondered what it was now, because it turns out that this has already been reported to the Empress herself. The one, in turn, added that all this is true. The subordinate then remarked to His Highness that a whole week had passed since their last sparring. He further asked if they should have crossed balls yesterday. This made the man think that he had never beaten him after all. He then handed him a stack of papers and said that if he could sort it all out in half an hour, then they would practice. The guy immediately agreed to this and thanked His Majesty. The man, for his part, sat back and thought that he was definitely not going to make it in time. This was his cunning plan to do nothing at all. After a small amount of time, the sparring did work out. After all, the subordinate still managed to get by in the short amount of time the prince had given him. Now they were fighting each other on the training ground. In the same place was also the protagonist. It was all because she was captured and transferred right after the class ended. The person who had captured her and brought her in was Turney. Despite all the fighting, the heroine thought that from the looks of him, he was good with a sword. Just the right kind of sword to slice her neck. Now she thought that her odds of dying had increased by a few %. The match lasted a small amount of time and was finally over. It was won by Hadrian, who presented his sword in front of his opponent. Suddenly, Turney shouted that he was sorry now, because his friend had almost won. After all, such a chance comes once in a lifetime. The men immediately turned their attention to him. The heroine asked if he was not His Majesty's assistant. Diana in turn stated that, as I expected, he was no match for His Highness. Hadrian stated that this is all just because the latter is not acting serious and smiling. The opponents, because of this, stated that it is all because he is happy. It is exciting to be so close to His Highness after all. He further shifted his gaze to the heroine and wondered what she was even doing here. Her mentor stated that she was smarter than she seemed, and that was why she finished her classes early. The Crown Prince, because of this, smiled and asked if it was true. He further added that they would check it out later after all. After a while, he looked at the girl more closely and saw her pensive face. He remembered the moment when the protagonist had spoken to Gabrielle. Next, he noticed that she was angry. Because of this, the girl wondered what it was saying, added that there was nothing like that. Nearby wondered what it was even saying at this very moment. The man inquired about what causes her such discomfort. Earlier, in turn, she thought that she was bothered by everything and, in particular, especially him. That said, she simply smiled and stated that there was nothing of the sort. The Crown Prince exhaled and remarked that it was a good thing then, because he just didn't need any disgruntled people here. The heroine wondered how much longer her life would be in jeopardy. Meanwhile, Turney stated that today had been such a long and hard day. Diano added that it had been quite hard for him too, and that his interlocutor remarked that all this is true because their highness is such a difficult person. Someone is running back and forth all day. At his command, someone is suffering in sword practice. The interlocutor remarked that of course he liked that his highness had ruthlessly pounced on him as if he wanted to kill him, but he was less focused than usual. Turney added that perhaps it was all because he'd gotten too good, or perhaps the prince's skills were regressing due to not enough training. The man from those words was very angry, and the heroine could see it. At that, she thought, enough of this guy talking such nonsense. But immediately after these words, they decided that they had to clean up and immediately ran away. At the same time, the protagonist together with a very angry crown prince were left alone. The man immediately turned on her head and asked if she had eaten, to which the woman stated that she still had not. Next, the chosen one stated that they had to go. The girl wondered where they needed to go, but the one sighed and remarked that he still does not like tightwads. The girl didn't understand right away, but then she did realize what he meant. After a while, they went to eat together at the same table. They sat opposite each other, and the table was overflowing with various foods. The man noticed that the girl almost did not eat and asked if she did not taste good. And she, in turn, said that everything is not like that, because everything is wonderful here. Then he also wondered why he ate so slowly. The heroine said that it was the first time she ate such food. After all, she had never tasted anything tastier. Because of such words, he just looked at the girl. Suddenly, a servant came up to him, and they talked about something briefly. The girl, in turn, wanted to listen to what they would talk about, but the man said that she should just eat. Then the protagonist took the food and thought that this is how the crown prince shows care. At the same time, she stated to the man that she would gladly eat everything here. After that, she continued her meal, but she was eating in a rather mannered manner. The crown prince simply watched his chosen lady eating, noticing every detail. Suddenly, a servant addressed His Highness again. The man asked what he wanted. Then he came close again and whispered something in his ear. Adrian told the man that he understood and that he would come back later. The servant also stated that he understood everything and would pass this one on to Her Majesty. After that, the man turned his attention to the heroine and stated that he would escort her out. The girl immediately got up and thought that he would just tell her to go. To her friends, she inquired of him whether he did not need to go now, to which the man stated that all of that was correct. But the girl wondered why then he would still escort her out. The one, in turn, stated that he was simply afraid that the girl would run away. After a while, Lucy approached Mrs. Etienne. The girl asked what she wanted from her. She, in turn, asked what their schedule was today. The girl noticed that it was about the schedule because she thought she would just study as usual. But she immediately shouted that all this is wrong. The heroine immediately asked Lilacia what she wants, and the woman continued that today they are waiting for something interesting. This interesting thing was a trip to Grace's palace. Because of these words, the heroine was simply shocked and wondered what she was saying. Further, she was even more horrified and immediately thought about it. After all, Grace's palace is the Empress's palace itself. Now she was dreading the fact that whether today was the day she was going to die. She thought that if only she had known in advance, she would have slept longer tonight. Further thought that she didn't need all this, for soon she would be asleep forever, and what was the point of sleeping any further? Immediately, the heroine asked her mentor if it was necessary for her to go, but the one with a smile on her face said that of course she had to go. After all, why such obvious questions Her Majesty expects on the girl? Next, Lucy grabbed her and stated that she had to get ready as soon as possible. Here, the cooking was progressing very so quickly. The girl asked her mentor if she would go there with His Highness. At that, she thought that there was no use for him, but it was still better than meeting Her Majesty alone, to which the woman declared that he would not be there. After all, Her Majesty had secretly summoned only her Lady Etienne. She further stated that it was such a great honor to have such a great honor fall before her. But the heroine was already disappointed and thought that she just didn't need this honor of theirs. After a small amount of time, it was finally done. Madame Lucy declared that this is her skill, and the girl looks just fine. She further stated that the girl was the best. After that, the heroine stated that she would go then. Next, she came out of her room, and there was a man in front of her. Raising her eyes, she saw that it was just like the crown prince. The man came out and her immediately asked where she was going. The heroine immediately hesitated to answer. She wondered if she could even tell him that Her Majesty had summoned her secretly. The man at this time said that what he hated most of all was being forced to repeat questions twice. Next, he leaned over and repeated where she was going after all. The girl was even more frightened and again hesitated to answer. At the same time, she wondered why today he was particularly meticulous with her. Suddenly, her mentor appeared and greeted His Majesty. Then she remarked to him that she was going to have an audience with Her Highness. After all, it turns out that the Empress herself called the girl. The heroine heard, and it thought to him whether it was all to be said. After all, it turns out that it was necessary to tell it to her just earlier. After that, the man asked if his mother had called her. The girl said that she had, to what the one remarked to her that if after all she was lying, he would not leave it so simply. The heroine immediately thought that all this is true, and she knows it all. Next, the Crown Prince stated that he was a bit restless right now. At the same time, he added to go and confidently answer all the questions, yes. The heroine, because of this, remarked that she understood everything and would answer unreservedly yes. Next, the prince stated that then he was leaving. The girl immediately rushed in the other direction and thought that it was necessary to get away from there as quickly as possible. But her chosen one stopped her and stated that she was going the wrong way. The girl immediately thought that means she needed to go the other way and rushed there. But the man stated that again she was going the wrong way. Then he took a deep breath and stated that she should just follow him. After a while, they finally arrived. The heroine was looking at the interior and thought that all those patterns on the doors were probably made of gold. Next, she thought what would happen if it spent all the piece, because she could then live her whole life on the money from its sale. The prince at this time declared that the stage was just out of the way, and at that he went to the front door. The heroine inquired whether the one would go in with her, to which the man stated that otherwise, why else would he have become there, dragging himself to the common? The girl further remarked to him to listen. She was to meet Her Majesty, one-on-one it turns out. But her chosen one did not want to listen to anything at the moment. Immediately he opened the door, and with this he astonished the heroine. After that, together with the prince, they still went into the room to the Empress. The woman at this time was sitting in her chair and saw that her son had rushed in with his chosen one. After a moment, the Empress smiled and told Lady Etienne to come quickly. The heroine saw her and was immediately frightened and very much confused at that very moment. Then she remembered what she had to do. At that, she ducked and greeted Her Highness the Empress. While doing so, she added that Arcangelo's blessing would come with her. The Empress also remarked that Arcangelo's blessing would come with her. After that, she added for those to sit down. The man along with the protagonist and immediately took a seat at the table. The woman asked with a smile that she didn't remember calling her son here. The prince at the same time just took his head to the side and didn't answer anything. She exhaled and stated that her son was such a credit, consider that he couldn't even lift his head. Next, she inquired if it had been a long time since they had seen Lady Etienne. Remembering what the Crown Prince had said before the meeting, the heroine remarked that it had been. Adrian inquired of his mother as to why she had summoned her, but the latter remarked that it was none of his business after all. The man stated that she was his fiancée after all. The Empress was very much surprised and immediately asked her maid if she had heard about it. She, in turn, smilingly remarked that yes, she had heard that the prince had clearly said that she was his bride.